We're talking today with Mr. Morris Kleiman of Grand Rapids, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Mr. Kleiman, can you begin by telling us a little bit about your own background? Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Grand Rapids, grew up in Grand Rapids, and came back to Grand Rapids from the service, and back to Grand Rapids from going to finishing up at Ann Arbor, getting my degree there, and then coming back and staying in Grand Rapids, and I've always been here.
And what did your family do here?
My family came, my father came here in the early 1900s, before the World War I, and they settled here, came through Boston. They settled here after being in Detroit, I guess, and then my father was a teenager, and they settled here and opened up a cleaning and pressing business on Stocking and Bridge. And from there they sort of graduated into a store with ready-to-wear. They actually started out in the used clothes business at that store. They used to go and buy clothing from widows. That was the only ready-to-wear there was, so that's how they got into that. And then they decided they went into findings. They sold a lot of yard goods and sewing material to the women, and he traveled. My grandfather had been a miller, I guess, and worked with farmers in Russia. They came from Russia, and he liked traveling around from Detroit. He went to see farmers in this area and liked Grand Rapids and settled here. And then my mother, they brought her down from Montreal. They heard about this woman in Montreal from a friend in Detroit, brought her down, and my father married her here in Grand Rapids just before World War I rather. Started, and they had to wait. They couldn't bring any more family over until after the war was over. And then my grandfather proceeded to bring over his wife and his other two children, an uncle and an aunt, and they all settled here. And the Kleimans have been and still, one of my nephew was still in one of the stores. They had family apparel stores, and they one of the.
You can pause
Let me
that.
just take that.
Yeah.
See who it is.
And then where did you go to school in Grand Rapids?
I started out at what is now the Vandenberg School over on Lafayette and Wealthy in the kindergarten. And we had a couple of years of school in East Grand Rapids. The Depression hit at that time, and the family moved back away from, they gave up their East Grand Rapids sites and home, and then we came and moved to a building. We moved into a property on Division in Burton Heights. So I started the 4th grade, I think it was, at Burton Junior High. It was a brand new school. They had just finished that school, and my mother thought it was a great school, and it was. And I stayed there until the 7th grade, and stayed there really till the 9th grade, rather, because they had a junior high school there. And then I went over to South and graduated from South. I graduated in 41.
Now, did you do ROTC when you were at South?
Yes, I was in the ROTC from the 10th grade through the 12th grade.
And what did they have you do in ROTC?
March. We marched. We did rifleman. We did things with the rifle. The officers, I got to be an officer, and I had a sword and a scabbard, and it was a very, it was a kind of a prestigious thing being in the ROTC at that time. And we had an Army officer, a colonel, who was in charge of the group, and a sergeant, a regular Army guy who was a sergeant. And we had a terrific time being in the ROTC. Matter of fact, we did an ROTC thing at our high school class day thing. That it was a show for all the parents, you know. and we did a thing in uniform, and it was the wrong thing to do because it was the 25th anniversary of the end of World War I.
Mm-hmm.
So we did something about World War I. Meanwhile, the war had started in 38 in Europe, and this is 41, and this is in June of 41, so December, when we got into the war here, we hadn't made it into the war yet, but they were already starting to look at drafting, at the putting everybody in. So anyhow, that wasn't a good thing because we had the parents crying their eyes out. We didn't understand why they were crying because they could remember World War I.
Did you have were you aware, particularly being in ROTC, or for that matter, being Jewish, what was going on in Europe at that point in time?
No, I didn't. I don't know. I think I had an uncle at that time who lost touch with his family, and there was a lot of questions about what was going on over there.
Right.
But we didn't have a clear picture of what was going on. As a matter of fact, I didn't get a clear picture of it until after I went over overseas, and I heard more there. And I didn't get a clear picture even then, and I had an experience of a Jewish woman coming to where we were camped out in Belgium, and she came to see Jewish soldiers. And I wrote a piece about it once, about meeting this woman, and we didn't understand what was going on. She told us in her broken Yiddish, and we with our broken Yiddish. Her Yiddish was better than our Yiddish. That was the language that they used over there, So we tried to, I say we, there was another Jewish guy in the group in my company area, Sam Loeb, and Sam and I came over and met her because they called us to. And then she told us how she had been living on this farm hiding with her child. She had a young daughter. And that was the last I ever saw of her, and it was the only real contact I had because I went offline sick before, and I reached Sam Loeb about a year ago on the phone. I found him because I started to study the Bulge story because we didn't know what was going on. The truth is we just didn't know anything. All we did is what we were what we were told to do. And being in the infantry, and I was carrying a Browning automatic rifle, and I was being a rifleman and an ammo carrier, and you did it. The weather was horrible. It was the worst weather I've ever experienced, and today with the snow on the ground, I can remember it very clearly. It was that kind of a thing. Well, Sam made it all the way through, and the 99th that I was in, the 99th Division, actually made it and opened one of the camps. They got to the camp, so I got a pretty good story out of him of what happened to the company and our platoon afterwards.
Okay. Well, that kind of gets ahead of ourselves a little bit, so let's roll it back again. So now, as a high school student, were you following at all events in Europe? Were you paying attention to the news?
Yes, I've got a scrapbook from World War II. I started a scrapbook when the Danzig corridor thing took place, and that was really the beginning of any war effort there. Poland was invaded, and I started keeping a scrapbook, and so I followed the war. As a kid, I'd been a stamp collector with 5 other students, good friends through those years, and we collected stamps from all over the world. We didn't collect U.S. stamps particularly, it was all foreign stamps. So we got to know about all these countries out there. It was very interesting to me. So when this whole war issue started in 38, I just knew it was going to affect everybody, and I just knew that, and I watched the war very carefully. I was interested a little bit in politics at the time. I used to collect political stuff when the elections were on. I'd go downtown. We had a great downtown Grand Rapids, in those years, and I went downtown. All of the candidates, all of the parties had their all the parties, socialist, communist, Republican, Democrat, libertarian. They were all down there. So it was a wild time for a kid to be able to gather up material from all those places. Norman Thomas ran for president at that time. I remember a lot about that, and we had a lot of interesting things happening. Roosevelt against Wilkie was the big election. I actually was asked to play the part of Roosevelt in the school election, and I had two teachers, a mother and daughter team that they both were teaching at South, and they wanted Roosevelt to win in the worst way, and so they took me under their care and helped me a lot, and I remember it very well.
But did you win?
Yeah, we did. We won.
Well, that's pretty good in Grand Rapids in any era.
Yeah, it was something that we won because they had this thing about the Depression time, and they thought Roosevelt walked on water, and a lot of people did. And Roosevelt was considered a great man and he died, by the way, when I was on the boat coming home.
Okay. So you're relatively aware, at least, and so you've got a pretty good idea that sooner or later you'll probably get caught up in this thing.
Well, I knew that was going to happen, and I wanted to get as much college time in before I had to go. I knew the draft was going to take me, but I just, because I was a 1A, and I knew that was going to call me in, but I wanted to get as much college time in. Boy, I don't get that many calls in a week.
Now, did you finish high school in 1941 then, or?
41.
41.
Went to Grand Rapids Junior College. That's the community college now. And I was there for the equivalent of 1 year of school, 2 terms.
Right.
And I then went to, because I knew I was getting called, I decided to go to Ann Arbor. They had a summer term and a spring term as well as the fall term. So they had 3 terms. 2 terms made up a year.
Right.
It wasn't a 3-term school like at MSU. It was a 2-term school, but always has been. And I went and I took a term in the summer after I left JC, and I got another term in until March, and in March of 43, I was pulled into service. So I got 2 years of college in before I went into the service.
All right. Now, describe the process of kind of induction and starting out into training. Where'd you go and what did you do?
You ended up in Fort Custer in Battle Creek. And at Fort Custer, they put you through the ropes of exam, and they gave you written exams. And you got a score on that exam that went with you. And placed you. It was what they used to decide what you should do.
Right.
And being right out of college, the exam was a very simple exam, and it was easy to get a high score. So I had a high score, so they thought I was a bright character, and I wasn't really that bright. They thought I was. And I had this high score, and it followed me through all the time. And it didn't do me any good either, because they used to expect things from me that I was better off if they hadn't, So that was part of my the beginning. They sent me to Atlantic City. In Atlantic City, it was because I was given, I had a broken nose, I had somehow broken something in my nose, and because of that, they put me in limited service. In Atlantic City, they set us up over there as a way station. Well, but prior to that, they sent me up to up above Minnesota, northern Minnesota, and I learned what cold weather was.
Yeah.
I didn't know cold weather. I thought I knew cold weather, but I learned cold weather up there. It was really cold. But I was only up there about 3 weeks, and they sent me to Atlantic City. And then from Atlantic City, they sent me down to Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, I went to a special training school there, and they gave me a supply clerk training,
Mm-hmm.
they called it. So they sent me after that. I guess I scored fairly well on that. They sent me to down to Shreveport, Louisiana, to an air base.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was there, I was in the supply group for the air base,
Mm-hmm.
and the lieutenant or captain, I think it was captain,
Mm-hmm.
Schlossberg, his name was. Captain Schlossberg said to me, I'm going to give you an important job, and I want to explain it to you. And he gave me a job that I thought was quite important.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to check out these air arms that were going overseas.
Mm-hmm.
It was my job to make sure that they had everything they were supposed to have. All the material and
Mm-hmm.
everything that they needed was in a sort of a supply package.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to check it very carefully and make sure they got it all. And they weren't allowed to go over without all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to wait until we got some of the stuff. So that's what I did. The captain said to me, he said, you ought to try out for some kind of officer training
Mm-hmm.
program. So I said, you know, they were asking all of the college level
Mm-hmm.
guys to do that. So I said to him, what's around? He said, there's a program called Army Specialized Training Program, and a lot of people know about it. ASTP was labeled with the acronym, and
Mm-hmm.
they sent me, they accepted me, and I got in, and there were a bunch of college guys that were in that, and
Mm-hmm.
we were sent to, I mentioned it to you, to Texas,
Mm-hmm.
to a school in Texas, and that school in Texas was
That was Sam Houston.
yeah, Sam Houston, and in Huntsville, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And that, by the way, is the place where the prison is.
Mm-hmm.
And the prison has a rodeo every year, and they're famous for that rodeo. Huntsville, Texas, is one of their claim to fame is that rodeo every year. So that was a great situation, and we were there about all of about 3 months. Now, by now,
Mm-hmm.
the war had made its move into Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and they had gone in June into
Mhm.
Europe,
Right.
44.
44.
So this is, I'm in March 43, by June 44, that had happened, I'd made all these moves.
Mm-hmm.
And I had meanwhile had my nose fixed
Mm-hmm.
in the Army. So had a dentist at the air base there fix it, and so it was, my limited service was taken off
Right.
because I wanted it off,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't think I'd get into officer candidate with it.
Mm-hmm.
So they needed infantrymen,
Mm-hmm.
and the story that I got later was that they really needed a lot of infantry. They had run short of candidates for infantry, and they took the whole ASTP program, which was an engineer's
Mm-hmm.
program.
Mm-hmm.
We were supposed to go into engineer training for the engineer corps, and they took us all through us into infantry.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up at Camp Maxey in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
not too far from Dallas, about 60 miles or 80 miles from Dallas. Because I had an aunt in Dallas, and I used to go visit her, so I remember that very well. And anyway, we're in Camp Maxey. It was a hellhole. It was not a neat place to be, but it was the barracks were clean. Everything was great,
Mm-hmm.
and we went through infantry training there, and we had a cadre that was professional Army cadre,
Mm-hmm.
but they were all what we thought were elderly guys. They were probably in their 30s.
Mm-hmm.
We thought they were old men, and they some of them were probably close to 35 even. That was really old, you know. So we had and none of them were. We had this problem. We were college boys,
Mhm.
and they didn't like us.
Mm-hmm.
And the ASTP guys suffered a lot. We were put through some rough stuff because they didn't like the college boys. They thought the college boys didn't belong in the infantry. They wanted somebody else. So we got through, they handed me a Browning automatic rifle. And my partner, Teed White, who got killed later after I went off the line, he took over the rifle from me in Europe. So that was my entry into most of my Army time was infantry. And I'm really not sorry now that I had that infantry experience. I think the infantry experience is a far more military type of experience than you can get in almost any other part of the military. I mean, that's really down and dirty military. And we were slogging it out. We ended up by September or so, we were sent overseas. So we didn't have much of basic training. It was very limited.
Okay. Now let's look at a couple other dimensions here of the training process. One of them is that you spent most of your time in the South, in Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas.
All of the time.
What was that experience like for you, kind of coming down from Grand Rapids and so forth? In what ways was it a different kind of place, and what struck you about it?
Well, you didn't really experience what I'd call Southern hospitality or Southern culture or any of that. You really were in camp with people who were all from where I was from, or the East, mostly the East and the Midwest. And that's the ones I was with.
Right.
There were some Southern guys in there, but they were. These were all in the infantry, at least. They were all from college-level kids. They had been to school 1 year or 2 years of college, so we were all pretty much the same. You know, there wasn't any much difference that we noticed. We didn't get into anything about Confederacy. We didn't have any of that stuff.
Well, I was thinking more along the lines of what was sort of off base. I mean, if you get liberty, you can go anywhere.
We went to, I got into Dallas to see an aunt. I used to go visit her there because I had a place to stay. I used to be there. And they had these watermelon stands. That was different. And we could go there to the watermelon stands, and you could get a half a watermelon for $1 or 50 cents or something like that. And you could sit and eat that watermelon. It was good because it was a good thing to do because there were no ice cream stands. It was all watermelon stands that we went to. And there was ice cream, but that wasn't what we went to. We went to something that felt like you were down there. Then I did go to New Orleans one trip and experience New Orleans. And we went to Baton Rouge, where LSU was, and we tried to meet up with the LSU women, and we did that. And I had in the at Hattiesburg, not in Hattiesburg, but in Huntsville, there were a lot of Eastern students, a lot of New York guys. There, it seemed like the college bunch. That ASTP program was a very important fact for me, and I think it was for them too, because we were truly what the books all call citizen soldiers. We were never soldiers. We were citizen soldiers, and we stayed that way. We weren't about to change as much as, the Army didn't change us as much as they might have changed other people. We had already experienced campus, and we'd already experienced other kind of people. We knew diversity. We knew a lot. We had a different level of experience than the ones who came right out of the house at home and went into the service. It was a different experience. And that having that bunch to go through training with was different. We really worked hard at becoming expert riflemen. And practically all of us earned that blue
Rifleman's
rifle
badge, yeah.
The blue rifle badge. Everybody earned that badge because they could handle the rifle very well. And the automatic rifle, I didn't need that. That was the worst spot to be in a squad, you know, because that was the firepower of the squad.
Right.
And it wasn't a new weapon. It was a World War I weapon. So we had to work with that. I had a team, two guys,
Mm-hmm.
T. White in particular, who worked with me. He was an ammo courier with,
Mm-hmm.
and we had to learn that rifle, tear it down, put it back
Mm-hmm.
together in the dark as well as in the light.
Now that was a heavier weapon than the M1,
It was
right?
heavy. My right shoulder is lower than my left shoulder still from carrying that weapon. That's one effect I brought home with me, was that lower right shoulder. When I put a jacket on, they have to put a pad in the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
That son of a gun did weigh a lot. I got found pictures of that baby, and that was it was an interesting weapon because it did have 30 cartridges
Mm-hmm.
in the magazine, and that was more cartridges. You only had 8 in the rifle,
Mm-hmm.
and it spit them out faster
Right.
than the rifle. So it was an advanced weapon for. It looked like an advanced one, but it wasn't, because we found out the Germans had a lot better automatic
They had
guns.
they had much better kind of light machine guns.
They had these portables, these the ones they could carry around, the light ones.
Mhm.
They could carry them around. Something like, I think the Uzi is a takeoff of what the
Well,
Germans had.
Well, they had a machine pistol, the Schmeisser, which was the
Yeah.
equivalent of the American grease gun or the British Sten gun, but a better weapon. But that was very short range. That didn't have.
The range was short. We couldn't shoot much further than a rifle.
Yeah, but a
Uh,
Schmeisser couldn't shoot
300.
very far at all.
300 to 500 feet out
Mhm.
was about as far yards rather that we could go out.
Yeah. Well, the little German weapon was pretty short
No,
range.
that right.
But they also had very high quality kind of light machine guns that
They
served
were
the
a hell
same.
of a lot better trained than we were all the
Mhm.
way. There was the experience that I had, that I did have. We went out on a couple of squad where they sent you out to pick up information,
Mm-hmm.
and we had to be pretty careful because they had good weaponry,
Mm-hmm.
better than we did.
Yeah.
And they had better firepower than we did. And we knew that. And here we're sitting, I ended up, like I say, we ended up in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And first we were in England. Now we got way late in England,
Right.
luckily,
Mm-hmm.
for quite a while. We were in England for probably 6-8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And we were there long enough to enjoy going into the cities nearby and hitting the pubs and going to dances, and we had a good time in England.
Mm-hmm.
And then one night, this one particular night I'll never forget, because we were in a barracks which was brick.
Mhm.
There's a lot of brick in England. They never as much wood as
Mhm.
we do here. So the brick barracks were smaller,
Mm-hmm.
and it only held the 3 squads of our platoon. And that's all you could get in there, and we were double bunked,
Mhm.
and so we were crowded in there. And the lieutenant came in. He was like I think he was a 90-day wonder lieutenant. He was a young guy. I don't know what happened to him. I don't think he made it through. The lieutenant came in at night. We had the light in there was a bulb hanging on wire.
Mm-hmm.
And it was dim, and we're all around him, and he says to us, "In 24 hours we will meet the enemy." And I mean, we're all astounded,
Mhm.
we were just taken up with it, and some of the guys blurbed out some 4-letter words and whatever else they could think of. And we all sat down, everybody went back to their bunk and wrote the most important letter of their life
Mm-hmm.
back home. And that was to the girlfriend, it wasn't to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't write that to your folks. You wouldn't say anything, you just wrote back to the girlfriend. And you made up a lot of decisions. I know, I talked to the other guys, they all made decisions about what they were gonna do with the rest of their life if they
Mm-hmm.
got out of it. And that was sort of the goal. The goal was to get through it somehow. And whatever way you got through it was to get home and get started again.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody felt like they had been chopped out of their lives. They had that 2 years or 2.5 or 3 years, whatever it was chopped out and it was gone. And you had to catch it up.
Mm-hmm.
You had to hurry up. Whatever you're going to do, you had to hurry up and do it.
What did you figure you were going to do?
Well, I just knew I was going to settle down right away because I had a girlfriend
Mm-hmm.
who I married, and we're now 62 years married.
Mm-hmm.
And we're both well, I'm glad to say, and I decided that I was going to marry this gal.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a letter to my brother, who was in the Navy, stationed at the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote him a letter, and my sister-in-law, he was married.
Mm-hmm.
I said, you'll meet this girl in Grand Rapids. If you ever meet her, be nice to her,
Mm-hmm.
because she's going to be your sister-in-law. So that was important. She sent me that letter, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
We still have that letter. So that was the kind of decisions you made.
Mm-hmm.
You made very important decisions for yourself.
Okay.
And you were serious about them too. They weren't make believe decisions. They were real.
Yeah. Let's roll back again a little bit. Can you describe the trip across the Atlantic?
Right. I was seasick part of the time. I got to know one of the supply sergeants in the company, and he knew I had this training
Mm-hmm.
as a supply clerk. So on board ship, he had me help him with his work,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a lot of paperwork. So I helped him with his paperwork, and so luckily I had non-com quarters and
Mhm.
non-com food and
Mhm.
better than the average guy. So the trip was fine, you know. We did have a couple of times where they thought we were being tracked by U-boats or
Mhm.
something, and we went into quiet time.
Mm-hmm.
And being on board ship was everybody, you know, there's some gambling going on, the
Mhm.
typical stuff you see in movies on
Right.
board ship.
Right.
That's pretty real stuff. And we had a good trip over.
What kind of ship were you on?
It was one of the typical Army transports, you know. It was one of those, I don't know who built it, but it was a small ship. It wasn't
Mhm.
a big ship.
So
it was-
like a Liberty ship type of thing, or a Victory ship, or?
I'm not sure, but it was probably one
Mhm.
of those. And it was a very large convoy.
Mm-hmm.
There were dozens and dozens of ships. They were as
Mhm.
far out as you could see. And they were, we went over in about 14 days or something like that. 12 days, 14 days. It was a
And-
pretty fast trip.
And was that September, or?
That was actually in September, I believe.
Okay,
yeah.
44, right. And so then you're there, and then you're in England. Do you remember what area of England you were based in?
We were near Portsmouth.
Okay.
And we were in a camp that they had built in the country outside of the cities.
Mm-hmm.
So we were in the country, and we used to go marching down the roads in England. England always had fog in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and boy, I'll tell you, popular is that.
So you were talking about being in England and being out in the foggy
Well,
mornings. And,
England was terrific. I loved England because the countryside was beautiful. It was fun going into the towns nearby, and it was fun meeting and meeting the women. And it was
Mhm.
USO-like places, but it
Mhm.
wasn't USO. It was their
Right.
USO, and they were very friendly. And the British, and of course, the language was easy,
Mm-hmm.
so we didn't have any problems with any of that. And we just had a good time. The money was funny.
Mm-hmm.
That was the experience of dealing with the money. When you were gambling, you gambled with pounds because you
Mhm.
had English money,
Mm-hmm.
but you thought it was dollars. In those days, a pound was worth $2.50.
Right.
So you were gambling high money, and you didn't know you were gambling high money. So I remember when you got through with your gambling, if you lost a few dollars, you really lost quite a few
Mhm.
dollars. And if you won a few dollars, you won a lot of dollars. But it was a fun time, and the only thing we did was really every day we got up, we would do our calisthenics and marching,
Mm-hmm.
and we would march on the country roads.
Right.
And in the morning, the fog would settle in the valleys, and it looked like there was like water.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty thick, and then it would lift, and when you came back, it was all hills and valleys.
Mm-hmm.
It was a beautiful time, and we had a good time.
Mm-hmm.
So when the lieutenant told us we were leaving that for what we were going after, well, our experience of what the war was going to be, what the fighting was going to be, was basically the basic training,
Mm-hmm.
and then they had movies.
Right.
The movies were World War I type movies.
Mm-hmm.
So it was bayonet, hand-to-hand combat. And that was our image of what combat was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like that at all.
Oh.
You were here, and the Germans were way out, like about 150, 200 yards, maybe 300
Mhm.
yards in places. You could see everything, see them walking around, doing their thing, and they could see us. And nobody was shooting at anybody unless you went out on a squad for reconnaissance. If you did a reconnaissance trip, there was liable to be gunfire. But that picture we had of what it was going to be like, you put that together with the statement that the lieutenant made, and everybody was plenty damn nervous.
Mm-hmm. So what actually happened? And he told you you
Well-
were going to meet the enemy in 24 hours, but what did you really do?
We, of course, we packed up and got our gear all together, and they put us on trucks
Mm-hmm.
and took us to some boats. And they were landing craft type boats.
Were they the big LSTs with the doors in the front, or were they smaller?
They were pretty good size, so
Okay.
they must have been what you're calling the LST.
Mm-hmm.
They were infantry landing craft. I know that. That's what they called them anyway.
Okay, well that's LCI. That's a different one. That had that stairs down the sides or things like that. Okay,
Well,
but
we got close to the ground. We didn't have to walk through the water.
right.
And we landed on one of the beaches.
Mm-hmm.
At one of the beaches, I don't know which one it was, and they loaded us up on trucks.
Mm-hmm.
And it was foggy and wet, and it was cold
Mm-hmm.
already. It wasn't real cold, but cold. And we took off on these trucks. And they were like trucks with canvas
Right.
over them. So they were like, I always likened them to the wagons that they took.
Mm-hmm. Covered wagons.
Covered
yeah.
wagons. They were covered wagon trucks, in a sense. And we got to a place where they stopped and said, "Get out." We set up out in the fields, and we were somewhere in Belgium
Mm-hmm.
by that night. And that was all from early morning till night. We were in Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, we were supposed to make it to the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we did. We made it to what they said. The front lines are up ahead of us. Get out. We're going up there and take over the line.
Mm-hmm.
They spread us out after we got there, and they had us take over and start digging. We dug foxholes,
Mm-hmm.
and we actually took over. Some of the foxholes were already there,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know who the guys were that went out,
Mm-hmm.
but we took over a part of the line,
Right.
and we were near a village called Krinkelt.
Mm-hmm.
And Krinkelt had a twin village. I can't remember the name of it, but I read about
Rocherat.
it. Yes. And those two villages were nearby us.
Mhm.
We walked by them, and there was a road that went from that village
Mhm.
right up to the front lines.
Right.
And we weren't that far from the village. Matter of fact, I had R&R in Krinkelt
Mm-hmm.
twice.
Now, is this still in Belgium, or were you across the line in Germany? Or
No,
you
we
not-
were this side of we were on the Belgian side of the Siegfried line.
Okay.
So I don't know if it was Belgium or Germany, but it was we were right up to the Siegfried
Right,
line. We
right.
could see the barbed wire,
Mm-hmm.
the cement tank
Obstacles, yeah.
obstacles, all that stuff that was
Mhm.
built for that line. And we were not happy campers, you know.
Mhm.
We were out in the cold. The Germans had bunkers. They had stoves,
Mhm.
hot. They were inside. We were outside. And that whole time, we thought they had a better deal than we did.
Yeah. Now, your unit it's the 99th Division. It's a new division
Green.
created during the war. Did it have any officers or non-coms in it who had some experience?
No, they were regular Army,
Mhm.
but they had never had any experience, field experience,
Mhm.
other than training.
Right.
Now, maybe a couple of them did, but I don't know, didn't know of any.
But mostly it was a group that all came over with and from the
They were
States.
glad to get the division because they had been cut out of the war. They had been left out in their minds. They
Mhm.
wanted to get in
Mhm.
to the battle, and they wanted the fighting, and they wanted we had top kick, not the lieutenant. The lieutenant was this young guy, like I said before.
Like a platoon sergeant, or
The platoon sergeants and the staff sergeants
Mhm.
and all of them were there wasn't that many, of course,
Mhm.
but whoever they were, and we had the one sergeant, our platoon sergeant Rosencrantz. He was short, stocky guy, and he was probably, like I say, in his 30s.
Mhm.
And we thought, we're 19 and 20,
Mhm.
and we're looking at 30 and 35, upwards to 40-year-olds.
Mhm.
We're thinking, who are these guys?
Yeah.
So it was, but we did what we were told to do. They had a lot of training,
Mhm.
but they had been training other divisions.
Right.
They were the trainers,
Mhm.
and this time they got into it.
Now, when did they put you up in the front line?
We went up in October something.
Okay.
And we were there October, November, December, when the battle broke out.
Okay. Now, Battle of the Bulge starts in the middle of December, so you're
Yes,
there for six
December
weeks, or
16th
yeah.
or something like
So
that.
you're there for between 6 weeks and 2 months or whatever before that starts. What was sort of daily life like when you were on the line before the German attack started?
Cold and wet.
Mm-hmm.
We had about 5 weeks of
Mhm.
constant snow almost every day,
Mm-hmm.
and it was always wet.
Mhm.
And we had one hot meal a week. We were eating C rations and K rations, and we were dug in, like I say, in front of the line, that Siegfried line,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a terrible time keeping ourselves dry.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of guys got trench foot, their feet got messed up. A lot of guys were one by one getting sick
Mm-hmm.
from the problem of the weather.
Mm-hmm.
And then the weather really hit toward the end of November. The last 2 weeks of November, we had severely bad weather,
Mm-hmm.
and it stayed with us all through. And the breakthrough came through right during that weather.
Mm-hmm.
The weather was supposed to clear up. I think they knew the weather was supposed to clear up, but it didn't clear up.
Mm-hmm.
And our problem was that we were pretty whacked out
Mm-hmm.
from staying in shape, and the only rest we had when we went back for what they call the R&R
Mm-hmm.
was for one night and part of 2 days.
Mhm.
So half a day in front and half a day in back of that night. And there you could go and you could dry yourself out,
Mm-hmm.
and that was only twice in the whole time we were there.
Now, did
Meanwhile,
men?
our socks
yeah.
were always wet.
So did men rotate out individually, or did they send platoons or squads or companies out?
Pretty
At a
much
time.
a squad would go out.
Mm-hmm.
They'd take a squad out of the line,
Right.
and then they'd spread them out and cover that.
Now, when you first, when you were at full strength and you went in, I mean, how large was your squad?
I have a hard time remembering.
Mm-hmm.
it was a standard company size.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there was probably 11 in the squad or 12,
Okay.
something like that. There was maybe 35 or 40 in the company.
In the platoon, probably.
In the platoon,
Right.
rather, and there were 3 platoons.
Right.
So you didn't really get to see the other platoons very much when you were in the line. You did see them during training.
Right.
Though that wasn't a problem, but because you had barracks that held a full platoon, where we had and a lot of space in the States. In England, they were small.
Right.
And we only saw our own squad most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent the time with the squad.
Right.
And that was in the front, your foxholes were spread out. We were spread out.
Yeah.
Over a long, a couple of 3 miles or more, I think. I read where they were spread out for 8 to 10 miles or 12 miles even. They were really covering a lot of
it's
space.
possible.
Yeah, they were pretty thin.
Mm-hmm.
And the only time you really got to see anybody else was when you did reconnaissance.
Mm-hmm.
If they beef up the squad and you'd go out with 12 or 14 guys.
Okay. Now, did you have to do that?
I think, I wipe a lot of that out.
Mhm.
I don't remember a lot of what happened, but I was on reconnaissance probably at least once every other week.
Mhm.
So I was out on reconnaissance about, I'd say 4 times, 5 times.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of thing would happen when you went out on reconnaissance?
You went out at night. You had to go through your lines.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to get through the stuff that was in the way on the Siegfried line.
Mm-hmm.
And they had already cut their way through a lot of that, so that you didn't have to do much cutting. The wire was already cut.
Okay,
They already had those lines.
Were there mines to watch out for or things like that?
I don't remember dealing with mines.
Okay.
They might have cleared them, I think they prepared those earlier. We were already,
Right, you were replacing someone who'd been doing that, yeah.
and so we didn't have that first experience of hitting that line.
Right.
We got pretty close to where the Germans were
Mm-hmm.
when we went out. And I didn't have anything to worry about except setting up the automatic rifle
Right.
every time
Mm-hmm.
and covering whoever went out in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't go all the way out.
Mhm.
I went up to a point and they'd plant me
Right.
and the team there, and they'd put a guy on each side of us,
Mm-hmm.
and we would stay there until the rest of them went out and they came
Mhm.
back. So the sergeant would take out 2 or
Mhm.
3 and they'd go further out.
Right. Did you have the sense that the Germans were sort of as spread out as you were? Or?
No, they looked pretty comfortable, as a matter of fact. The Germans, they weren't, there were young guys there,
Mm-hmm.
young and old. There
Yeah.
wasn't in between. It
Right.
wasn't like our group. It wasn't 20-year-olds.
Yeah, that was fairly standard for German infantry units at that point.
They were young and they were old.
Mhm.
And they were, you could see that the young ones, well, you really couldn't see what they were doing. I shouldn't say that. We could see them close enough, and they looked pretty comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
We could see their cigarette light. They'd light up their
Mhm.
cigarettes. They didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
They thought they were pretty safe.
Mm-hmm.
So they lit up their cigarettes easily at night. We didn't light cigarettes
Mhm.
at night. We were out in the open, and they were actually in bunkers,
Mm-hmm.
and we could see the cigarette
Yep.
go when they'd puff it.
Mm-hmm.
You could see the cigarette come on, brighten up, and you couldn't shoot them because you knew they were inside,
Mm-hmm.
looking through openings of some kind, because they didn't spend the time outside.
Mm-hmm.
They were inside these bunkers, and they had their stuff dug in
Mhm.
channels. They had tunnels, and
Mhm.
they had all kinds of stuff there that we didn't have.
Okay. Now, what do you remember sort of about the beginning of the German offensive then?
Well, first
Okay.
thing I got to tell you about
Mhm.
before that is we went through Thanksgiving,
Mm-hmm.
and Thanksgiving was the big event of the whole time there. and they brought up a Thanksgiving dinner,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a good dinner. So we had a Thanksgiving that we celebrated, and I've never forgotten that. That
Mhm.
Thanksgiving was a big event of our time in
Mhm.
the front line. And when they brought it up, they brought up the lines, and we ate during the day.
Mm-hmm.
It took a lot of chances
Yeah.
because, and you weren't allowed to gather in groups,
Mm-hmm.
but we could go through the line. We could see what we were eating at least. That was the great thing about the meal. So Thanksgiving Day, the Army really put itself out for
Mm-hmm.
us. So we were all pretty thankful for that. And, but the worst part of our experience was the retreat section, retreat time,
Mm-hmm.
because we heard the noise.
Mm-hmm.
It was north of us.
Mm-hmm.
The 106th Division was north of us. We were the southern side, and it went right between them and us,
Mm-hmm.
the 99th. As I read about it, I didn't know then what was going on. All I know is there was a lot of shooting and tank noise,
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of stuff going on. And we could see off in the distance,
Mm-hmm.
when we started moving around, we could see off in the distance a lot of activity.
Mm-hmm.
But we were told we had to pull out and get the hell out.
Mm-hmm.
And they took us out of the lines. And I remember walking past, and it was snowing like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
We had deep snow to trudge through, and we had picked up whatever we could carry, and we were told, take just what you need,
Mm-hmm.
leave the rest behind, because we're in a hurry. And we pulled out of there, and they put us into long lines of two in a line, two side by side, two, not single file, double file. And we could see the rest of the division. And they were, you look out over the field and you would see one line going this way.
Mm-hmm.
You look out over this way and you'd see that line going that way.
Mm-hmm.
It was like we didn't know what was going on.
Mhm.
And we were just headed for what became the U.S. lines,
Mm-hmm.
where they tried to stop the Germans.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up in open fields where the tanks were all blown up, blown to hell. Everything
Mhm.
was, a lot of tanks burning.
Mm-hmm.
We saw a lot of carnage.
Mm-hmm.
It was really bad. And we slept out in those fields because we were so tired. We
Mhm.
did 5 days of just going back. And all we had left to eat were D-bars. That was those high value bars,
Mhm.
chocolate bars, which gave you diarrhea.
Mm-hmm.
We thought the D-bar was a very apt description.
Now, was your unit, were you under fire during this time, or?
We were under fire from I don't know if it was tanks or artillery,
Mm-hmm.
but there was a lot of artillery fire.
Yeah.
And we were lucky that we came through it pretty good. Actually, every morning we would wake up to artillery fire,
Mm-hmm.
because they wouldn't fire at night. They would fire during the day when they could see what they were hitting.
Right.
And they were trying to pick off, but the 99th made it out pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
From the stories I read. We
Yeah.
all did. We all got back to the American lines, and we got back to where you could, I was able, because I was sick,
Mm-hmm.
very sick by then, and hurting,
Mm-hmm.
and because I had pleurisy. That's what I found out later. I had
Mhm.
pleurisy, and the pain from pleurisy was severe, so that I went back to the medics.
Mm-hmm.
And they had set up, the medics had set up, the setup was a Jeep,
Mm-hmm.
and the Jeep had the material they had there,
Mhm.
what they had for use. And they sent me back. They put me on another Jeep, and I went back to, actually to a hospital in Liège.
Mm-hmm.
And it took most of the day to get to Liège, but I ended up in a hospital in Liège. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I got to Liège, it was the 24th,
Mm-hmm.
so it was like 8 days later.
Yeah.
So I got to Liège, And the next day we heard that that was when they tried to kill Eisenhower. Eisenhower was the target, and they had sent some of the bombers into Paris,
Mm-hmm.
and they made it to Paris. So we knew that Liège could be
Mm-hmm.
under fire any moment.
Right.
But then we had heard about Bastogne,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't remember if we went past Bastogne or not. I do remember a couple of things that still come to mind, and that is, we walked by a pile of Christmas presents.
Mm-hmm.
The pile was as high as a house. I mean, it was 2 stories high, and just like this. And a lot of them were torn open,
Mm-hmm.
and the guys were swearing. I don't celebrate Christmas, right?
Mhm.
As a Jewish guy, I don't
Mhm.
celebrate Christmas. I didn't have any presents in that pile.
Mm-hmm.
I might have had some kind of gifts or something for Hanukkah, or something,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't thinking about that. I felt so sorry for these guys. They were devastated when they went past that pile of Christmas presents.
Mm-hmm.
If anything took it out from under them, that did it. That was a real tough moment for everybody that I was with.
Okay. Now they got you to the hospital and so forth, and it
I got to
gets be
Liège,
Christmas, and
and then they needed the beds
mm-hmm.
because they started back the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And between Christmas and New Year's, it must have been, I got into Paris by the I was in Liège for 2 days or so,
Mhm.
3 days. And then they took me back to Paris and put me in a hospital in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And then, before New Year's, in other words, this all happened very
Yeah.
fast. I'm in the hospital in Paris. It was a beautiful hospital. It was
Mhm.
very well put together, real nice. And I'm in bed pretty sick, but I was able to walk.
Mm-hmm.
I was an ambulatory patient. They took all the ambulatory patients because they needed the beds.
Mm-hmm.
They put us in the Grand Hotel in Paris. Now, the Grand Hotel was the Grand Hotel. It was beautiful. And we had access to the shops,
Mm-hmm.
and there were a lot of exits. If you wanted to
Mhm.
get out, you could have.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do it. Some of the guys did. They took off and they went out and came back. But I was too sick to go
Mhm.
running around. And I did buy a couple of scarves, I remember, and sent them home. That was the night that the Glenn Miller Band, was New Year's Eve.
Mm-hmm.
The Glenn Miller Band played in the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to see the Glenn Miller Band, and the word came out that Glenn Miller had gone down somewhere,
Yeah.
and he wasn't going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And Tex Beneke took it over. I remember it was one hell of a night.
Mhm.
We had a big night in the Grand Hotel. Of course, I didn't know what had happened back at the division. I learned that a lot later.
Mm-hmm.
So we had that, and then shortly after that, they took us all and put us in hospitals in England. We
Mhm.
took us across the Channel, and I hardly remember that. I hardly remember how I got back to England.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was probably pretty whacked out.
Was it still pleurisy, or were you getting other things along
I
with it?
kept getting one thing after another, and I don't know what they were. They were
Mhm.
just, I never got better. I never got well
Mm-hmm.
until after I got back to the States, actually. And even then, I didn't really get back on my feet well for about, I even got married. When I got married, I wasn't that well.
Mm-hmm.
My wife always jokes about, her mother told her, "I hope you know what you're doing.
Mhm.
He's not a well boy."
Well, how long after you got back did you get married?
Well, when I came back to the States, I jaundiced in England.
Mm-hmm.
And one morning woke up, I'm bright yellow.
Mm-hmm.
My eyes are yellow, everything. And jaundice cases were sent back to the States as soon as they could get us back here.
Mhm.
They sent us to was a camp, a hospital, a government hospital south of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
I think Rock Island or something like that.
Well, there's a Rock Island, there's a Rockford.
Rockford.
Rockford, yes,
I think
west
you're
of
right.
Chicago
Rockford,
a little bit,
Illinois. In Rockford, there was a hospital there, and they put us in a ward.
Mm-hmm.
Every guy in the ward was jaundiced. And it just got better. The
Mm-hmm.
more they left us alone, the better it got.
Mm-hmm.
And so we learned a lot about jaundice. And I even made it to Chicago for a weekend. And I ended up going to Custer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when things started to come together for Shirley and I.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we started seeing each other again. And we decided to get married. I was still in the service.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get out till, as I told you, in December.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there probably 3 months or 4 months. We were married in October.
Mm-hmm.
So during half of October and all of November and a couple weeks in December,
Mm-hmm.
we were at Fort Custer.
And what were you doing at Fort Custer? Were you still just sick?
Waiting to be let out.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to work in that section that was typing
Mm-hmm.
the papers, and she got a job there.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived with a family in Battle Creek, and we took the bus out. We didn't actually take the bus too often because
Mhm.
there was an officer who drove there every day, and we got a ride with him.
Mm-hmm.
We actually paid him to ride with him. So we got a ride out every morning. And it was an experience being married and being in
Mhm.
camp. And I didn't have anything really to do there much.
Mm-hmm.
But I got lucky, and I met up with, his name was Dick Rosen. Dick had been with the group, with the company, and had been injured
Mm-hmm.
on the counterattack period.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me how bad it was. Most of the casualties in my company took place then.
Mm-hmm.
They happened on the counterattack. And the 99th was sent in. They still were green troops. You know,
Right.
we were still green troops. That was the first real fighting that the division did.
Parts of the 99th were defending in the front lines against the German attacks. So some parts of that unit were under attack. They held together better than the 106th, and so you guys got out.
Yeah.
But yeah. But the rest of you wouldn't have had any. Yeah.
We experienced firepower.
Okay. You would kind of we were talking at the point where that tape ended about sort of what had happened with your division and so forth, and they gotten through to the end of the war.
I got that information from Dick, and it wasn't good information.
Mhm.
I knew Teed White had been killed,
Mm-hmm.
and he was the one I was the most interested in because
Mhm.
he was the buddy.
Right.
And I was not in the mood. I was not comfortable
Mm-hmm.
with anything about the military.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't wait to get out, and I wanted to take off the uniform, and
Mhm.
I wanted to get back to civilian life. I didn't like what the war did.
Mm-hmm.
I learned later how they had, gotten to the camps and relieved the camps and all of that. That whole history came out to me later.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get any participation in it. I did participate in helping it
Mm-hmm.
in my own way, but so I participated here.
Mm-hmm.
But the Army for me was an experience that made me appreciate everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I've always had a high level of positive feelings about everything else. The Army for me was a necessary evil in a sense, a thing we had to do and we should do. And right now I feel that way. I still
Mhm.
feel that way. That if the United States calls on somebody to come into the Army or into the service, they should go and do their part,
Mhm.
get it over with, and get it over with. Get back to their lives. It was something where you slice it out and do it.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't make a career out of it. I wasn't going to be a career Army person.
Okay. Now, when you do come back and then you do muster out of the Army at the end of 1945, now you're married and so forth, what did you do after that?
Well, we came to Grand Rapids, and I wanted to go back to school, and the GI Bill came on.
Right.
And I participated in the GI Bill. I signed up for the GI Bill. And I remember there was even unemployment insurance for the guys.
Mm-hmm.
I got some unemployment checks
Mm-hmm.
trying to decide what to do during
Mm-hmm.
that interim period. I'd never signed up for unemployment in my life,
Mm-hmm.
but here it was.
Yeah.
And we used it, and it was great, and especially that we were vets. They
Mm-hmm.
asked us to do it. And the state was very good about
Mm-hmm.
offering us help. And we came back here and we moved in with my folks.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother had come back from Europe by then. And after a while, and so he moved in, and he wasn't married yet. That's the brother that he was in motorized cavalry.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided, Shirley and I talked it out, and we decided that I should go back and get my degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I signed up for the GI Bill, and we went to Ann Arbor and set up there, and I went to school from 46 to 47.
Mm-hmm.
About a year and a half. I got two more full years of
Right.
school by going to 3 terms.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got the 2 years done and got my degree and came back to Grand Rapids.
What did you get your degree in?
I got a BBA,
Mhm.
Bachelor of Business Administration, and a major in accounting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to go into accounting, and after I visited a few accounting offices and found out that it wasn't enough to live on,
Mhm.
They were not paying very well in those days, I decided, well, I'd go to work, and I
Mhm.
went to work in the family business.
Right.
And I went to work for an uncle. He had a store, a clothing store. The family had these family apparel stores.
Mhm.
And it was the Leonard's department store. A lot of people in Grand Rapids shopped in the Leonard department
Mhm.
store. And I went there, and I went to work for him. And then I went over to Division Street,
Mhm.
which had the Kleiman family store
Right.
there. And I got in, became a partner with my dad and my brother, and I was there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed there until I decided to get out and go on my own,
Mhm.
and I felt I could. And I started doing what I call orderly liquidations and so forth. You'd buy into companies and try to restart them,
Mm-hmm.
or you'd liquidate them,
Mm-hmm.
and do it in an orderly manner so that they weren't distressed. Orderly is different than distress
Mm-hmm.
distribution. If you go in distress, everything goes for nothing. So I kind of got involved in that, and then I met up with a young guy who was in the office machine business.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to bring me his trade-in equipment, and I used to set it up for sale. In these sales I would
Mhm.
have, I would use it and put it to remarket it in
Mhm.
those sales. And those orderly liquidations. And he came to me once and said, "Why don't you join me?" And we got a hold of a cash register from a company called Litton Industries.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a cash register made in Sweden.
Mhm.
And NCR was the only cash register in the market.
Right.
So I said to him, I thought there'd be room at least for one more cash register
Mhm.
in the country. So we took that on. I took that on and went into the cash register business. And that led me into electronics,
Mm-hmm.
because registers turned electronic
Right.
very early. And so I was in the electronic cash registers until scanning came in.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of the first scanning systems was L.V. Eberhardt's chain, and that was our customer. He was our very largest customer,
Mhm.
and we introduced scanning by putting them in his stores. And that was one of the major things I remember that was a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in that business, in the business machines, until it became personal computers,
Mm-hmm.
and then even larger computers. So what was called Basic 4s, they were
Mm-hmm.
non-IBM, but they
Right.
were Basic 4. They were small computers like DEC
Mm-hmm.
computers. And so I got into the computer business, and I ended up in personal computers very early on.
Mm-hmm.
I experienced selling machines that were like the Apple before, when Apple became popular and you couldn't get Apple, so I got Franklin. I was a dealer, a distributor, and dealers and distributors always found their way to the product, you know. That was who we were. And I sold a lot of retailers, a lot of cash registers for a while. And I built up the company, and then I sold the company. So I had 25 years in that business. So that was my business life. Meanwhile, Shirley and I are members of our Jewish community here, and the rest of the community as well. And we've been very active over at the synagogue on Lafayette. And she's over there baking today, as a matter of fact. So we've spent our lives here in Grand Rapids, and it's been a good run for us. My daughter is in Ann Arbor, got her doctorate. She's a teacher. She's just retired this year, and now she's working at the U of M part-time, and she's working at Eastern University part-time, doing mentoring. Her job at Ann Arbor, by the way, is mentoring the athletes.
Wow.
She's teaching the athletes how to be mentors. And that's quite an experience
Yes,
for her.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what she's doing. And Ian, our son, he's going to be 60. He is teaching, as I told you earlier today, he is teaching writing. He's got a degree from MIT. Never really followed engineering. Got involved as a 60s guy in alternative lifestyles, as they call it, right? And we've watched him do his thing all these years. But he loves what he's doing now at Grand Valley. So he's an adjunct at Grand Valley. So the kids are doing okay. I have a grandson, he's in New York, he's writing. He made it to the Fox News morning program this week. Last week he was on there, and he's made it to YouTube as an accepted humorist. So you know, he's doing okay. So we've had a very good life, we feel, and we're very lucky. Both of us are able and feeling well. That's pretty much the whole story of our lives.
It's a pretty good story. And thank you very much for taking the time to tell it to us.
You're welcome.
Okay.